I'll be back.
That's a pose right there.
That's John Murray. He was a mayor and he was a member of the Iowa legislature.
Wow. He looks tough.
Yes. Yes, he chewed the heck out of that thing.
Great. That's a great photo.
Thanks.
Bye.
What a
Hey,
beautiful
everybody.
porch. Yeah.
Good afternoon, everybody. Can I get everyone to kind of squeeze in? They want you all as close as you can be. That's perfect. We Iowans know how to follow directions. Well done. So, my name is Janine Grady, and I'm the chair of the Marshall County Democrats. As such, it's my honor to get to help all of the campaigns if they ask me to. As chair, it's also my responsibility to get the 2020 caucuses organized. So I'm going to take this opportunity to shamelessly pitch this request to all of you to be as helpful as you possibly can be in getting the caucuses organized and on caucus night so that nobody in this county or in whatever county you're from leaves the caucuses thinking this was a waste of time. So that's my pitch for that. I want to thank Michelle Roseborough and the Historical Society of Marshall County for making this gorgeous venue available. Michelle is super proud of the work the Historical Society does and of the properties that they oversee. And I think that she would be happy to give tours to anybody of the house after the event. So now I get to welcome our guest. And I want to take just a second and talk about how I became aware of Beto O'Rourke. In the summer, June of 2016, after the Pulse nightclub shooting, Democrats in the House of Representatives decided to hold a sit-in on the floor of the House until Republicans agreed to vote on gun control legislation. In response, the Republican Speaker Pro Tempore of the House, Dan Webster, had the C-SPAN cameras turned off. So then Congressman O'Rourke and others got out their phones and live streamed the whole thing on Periscope and Facebook. So I went to his Facebook page to follow along, and I discovered that he had tapped into the best use of social media for a politician. Not just to self-promote, as they do, but to really keep his constituents informed. And several months later, in the winter of 2017, when he and a Republican congressman from Texas were trying to get back to DC, which was snowed in, they rented a car together and live streamed the whole thing. And basically had a rolling town hall all the way back to DC. And I thought, that's something very, very different. So I believe that we are lucky to have Beto O'Rourke among a brilliant field of candidates. So let's welcome Beto O'Rourke.
Thank you all for welcoming us to Marshalltown. Janine, thank you for the introduction. Michelle, thank you for hosting us at this beautiful property. I want to see more of it. We got a very brief tour after we parked and came through, but it looks extraordinary, and I want to understand the history of this. To each of you for taking some time out of your day and welcoming a stranger from far west Texas who wants to not just introduce himself to you, but listen to you. hear what's on your mind, have a chance to answer your questions, hopefully leave a better candidate, a better person, and a better public servant if I have the chance to serve you as President of the United States come January of 2021. I can't help but notice, and a nice gentleman just pointed out to me, I'm giving a stump speech and I'm standing next to a stump right here. I think you can all see me, but if at any point you can't, you know that I'm happy to get on this stump and deliver this speech from this tree trunk. Okay. I'm sure it's okay with everybody. As a member of Congress for 6 years, every single month without fail, I held a meeting just like this, sometimes with fewer people, sometimes with 400 or 500 people attending. It was a town hall, all comers welcomed, no holds barred. You could ask any question, level any criticism. You could love me, and my mom often came to those meetings. You might be disappointed in me, you might have a question that you wanted to ask me, but without fail, we held those meetings. And without fail, it made me a better representative, more reflective, more accountable to the community, constantly reminded me of who it is that I serve, and to whom I must answer at the end of the day. And so every vote that I took in the House of Representatives, I've had on my mind that I'd have to face my constituents sometime within the next 30 days. Explain that vote that I took, or come back and answer where we are on the progress on the legislation that we agreed would be a priority for our hometown of El Paso, for our state of Texas, for our country, the United States of America. And there was some healthy level of fear in my gut before I walked into that auditorium or to that library. Sometimes we hold them outside like we're doing right now in a public park, because I was gonna have to answer to the people who put me into that position of trust and power. How am I accounting for my representation of 750,000 of my fellow Americans? Only one of us gets to do this, and how am I doing in that position? Every single one of those years that I was in Congress, I was in the minority. So couldn't just write legislation and ask the Speaker of my own party to help me get it passed. If I was gonna do anything of any significance, I had to find those Republican colleagues with whom I could work. The common ground from which we could start, maybe expand it a little bit if we tried. Compromise, though that is a 4-letter word in Washington, D.C., right now amongst Democrats and Republicans alike, we found a way to find those Republican colleagues. Somebody at a meeting like this stood up and said, Beto, I know that you've been working on turning around the VA in El Paso, which when you were elected was the worst in the country for mental health care wait times, meaning that veterans who came back from Vietnam 50 years ago, coming back today from Afghanistan, were waiting not days or weeks or months, some cases years, sometimes never got in to treat post-traumatic stress disorder that they've been carrying with them their entire lives, the consequences of traumatic brain injury, military sexual trauma. We were able to turn around the El Paso VA by focusing on the El Paso VA, but someone at a meeting like this stood up and said, you may not know this, but those veterans who come back from combat and war and service with an other than honorable discharge are by law precluded from setting foot in the VA. They can get no care whatsoever. And at a time that 20 veterans a day in this country every day take their lives, and 16 of those 20 were unable, or for whatever reason unwilling, to get into the VA to get that life-saving help from a psychiatrist or a psychologist or a primary care provider, the death rate amongst those veterans with an OTH discharge is twice as high. So we wrote this bill, the Honor Our Commitment Act. And as the name implies, it means that we all want to do our part for those who serve this country. There should be a consequence for the status of your discharge, but that cannot be your life. And yes, it's going to be expensive to provide care to those whom we're not providing care to now, but let's bear any burden, pay any price for those who put their lives on the line for this country. And as well-intentioned as that legislation was, and the fact that it was spurred by veterans and their family members who wanted to see me do the right thing while I had a chance to do that, that bill was going to go absolutely nowhere unless we could find the Republican colleague with whom we could work. So Mike Kaufman of Colorado saw the same problem, and though he's a Republican and I'm a Democrat, wanted to approach a solution as well. We just had a different way of seeing things. We were able to sit down, compromise, and introduce a consensus piece of legislation. We prevailed upon our colleagues in the House. We were able to get it passed 435-0. Work with our colleagues in the Senate, with our friends, making new friends where we had to. And then it got signed into law by Donald Trump, a man with whom I agree on almost nothing. But we could find enough common ground and common cause to do enough common good to save the lives of our fellow Americans who had put those same lives on the line for this country. It's the same way that we expanded protection for public lands in El Paso, the same way that we invested in our ports of entry. These are our connections with Mexico, through which the vast majority of everyone and everything that ever comes into this country first passes. The trade that might originate here in Iowa, tourists and travelers, those who legitimately want to cross with documents. If we have a better understanding of who and what is coming into our country, we're going to be safer and we're going to facilitate the trade and the jobs connected to that. Work with John Cornyn, my senior Republican senator in Texas, to get that done. Janine mentioned that not only will I walk across the aisle, I will drive across the country with someone who sees things a little bit differently than I do. I grew up in a household where we had to make a virtue of this necessity. My mom, a lifelong Republican. I hope I've learned how to talk to Republicans, how to attract them over to ideas that we share in common, because I convinced her to vote for me for U.S. Senate in this last election. We were able to attract a record number of Republicans and independents and expand the number of Democrats who participated in a state that before 2018 ranked 50th in the country in voter turnout. Dead last, not because we love our democracy any less than you do here in Iowa. 50th in the country because we were drawn that way. Some people, based on their race or their ethnicity or their country of national origin, drawn out of a congressional district, drawn out of a reason to vote, drawn out of their democracy to predictable results. You add to that the compounding effect of voter ID laws, where you can use your license to carry a firearm, to prove who you are at the ballot box, but you cannot use your student ID at the University of Texas at Austin or Paul Quinn College or TSU to prove who you are at the ballot box. To transcend that, we went to every single one of the 254 counties of Texas. No matter how blue and reliably Democrat, we showed up because we were not going to take you for granted. No matter how rural, how red and reliably Republican, we showed up because we were not going to write you off. King County, Guthrie, the county seat, voted for Donald Trump 96% in the last election, but we showed up there nonetheless because they're every bit as deserving of being respected, of being heard, of being listened to, of being fought for, and of being served. And I had no hope of delivering for the people of King County unless I first showed up in Guthrie and heard what was on their mind, saw things from their perspective. And as I'm going to do today, I left King County a better candidate, better capable to reflect the interests of those whom I wanted to represent in the United States Senate. That way of working together, as we did in Congress, of campaigning together, as we did in Texas, that though we did not win, produced some transformative results in our state. We no longer rank 50th in voter turnout in the United States. Young voter turnout up 500% from the last midterm election. New members of Congress, Democrats elected to reliably red seats. The composition of the state house has changed. 17 African-American women elected to judicial positions in Houston, changing the face of criminal justice in our country's most diverse city. So Texas is now in play, and so are her 38 electoral votes. We count, we have a seat at the table, and we will contend not just in every statewide election, but in every national election going forward. That's the way that I'm campaigning now to serve you as President of the United States, going everywhere for everyone, regardless of the differences. No me importa. I could care less if you're a Republican or a Democrat, where you live, to whom you pray, who you love, how many generations you have been in this country, or whether you just got here yesterday. All that matters at this moment is that we are together and we have an historic opportunity to deliver for our country. Regardless of the differences, from this point forward, I hope that we are Americans first, because the challenges before us are the greatest of our lifetimes, however old you are. A country where millions cannot see a doctor or take their child to a therapist or afford their prescriptions. A country in 2019, the year of our Lord, the wealthiest, the most powerful place on the planet, and people are dying far too often of diabetes, of the flu, of curable cancers, because we have not found the political will, though we have the resources, to take care of them while we can. We have an economy that works too well for too few, and not at all for too many. A concentration of wealth and power and privilege that is unprecedented in our lifetimes. You'd have to go back to the last Gilded Age to see anything resembling what we have in America today. And we must not only break up that concentration of power and return more opportunity to people, but we must invest in people and in their communities. Public education should begin not in kindergarten at 5 years old, but pre-K for every 4-year-old in this country. We need to invest in the educators, the teachers, the nurses, the librarians, the counselors, the cafeteria workers, the school bus drivers, and the custodians, so that they're not working 2 and 3 jobs just to make ends meet, because they have that most important job right in front of them. That little kid whose lifelong love of learning, once unlocked, will make them unstoppable, make this country unbeatable. We got to make sure that when they graduate from high school, they're graduating both college ready to pursue higher education without adding a dime of debt to their backs, and also career ready. Ready to work those jobs that provide purpose and function in their lives where they live, and allow them to command a paycheck so they don't have to work a second or a third job. One job should be enough. That means that we empower and strengthen unions, not diminish and weaken them in this country. We make sure that every young woman and every young man has access to an apprenticeship that will allow them to learn a trade that will serve them for the rest of their lives and serve the rest of this country. Además, in addition, every mother returning to the workforce, every father returning to the workforce after raising their kids, or whose jobs have been automated out of existence. I don't care if you're 30 or 40 or 60 or 70 years old, those same apprenticeships allow you to be able to live with dignity where you live in your hometown, to shoulder your fair share of the responsibility and the burden so that it rests a little bit lighter on everybody else. This is key to our ability to advance individually, as families, as communities, and as a country. Because any hope of full political democracy in the United States of America, and we're a long way from that, rests in our ability to have something approaching economic democracy in America. Every child, every woman, every man must be able to see a future for themselves in this country, or else this country will have no future as a democracy. And I want to make sure that at this very divided, highly polarized, hyper-partisan moment, we are talking and acting in such a way that brings people together. Economically, democratically, through a new Voting Rights Act that ensures that there's one person and one vote, that everyone's registered because we have automatic voter registration and same-day voter registration. We no longer allow members of Congress to choose their voters. It should be the other way around. We end political and racial gerrymandering in this country. And we get big, unaccountable money out of our politics. No more PACs. And that's why I don't take a single dime from a single political action committee or corporation or lobbyist. We also have to make sure that there is no divide between urban America and rural America. And if we want to revive rural America, let's start by listening to rural America. So many of the solutions for this part of America are found in our communities, from our families, from those who've already done so much to feed and clothe not just this country, but so much of the rest of the planet. Let's make sure that we partner, not sympathize or offer pity, with those who need the investment in order to be at their full potential. I was telling the story about showing up in a rural community in Texas, Silverton, where I was talking about investing in broadband, internet, and other infrastructure that community needs to thrive. As a partner, someone stood up and said, in 1937, I was in first grade in this very same community, and we did not have electricity. We didn't want a handout. We didn't want somebody to do it for us. We formed a cooperative here in this community, and FDR and the Rural Electrification Administration met us halfway. And so as a first grader, before the first day of school, I could read by electric candlelight, just like the kids in Chicago or Tokyo or London. My life had value. Our community was now competitive. If we allow farmers to make a profit in what they grow, if we allow them to contribute their fair share in combating climate change by growing cover crops, allowing the technologies that invest in precision tilling and farming, capturing more of that carbon out of the air. It's another way in which they can make a profit, keep those farms together, pass them on to the next generation, and allow them to provide us our food and national security, our independence from the rest of the world, our ability to provide for the rest of the world. And on that subject of climate change, it is the very youngest among us who understand the consequences, because disproportionately they will bear them based on our action or our inaction. The 1 degree Celsius that this planet has warmed just since 1980, over pre-industrial revolution levels, that has caused so many of the fires, the floods, the storms, the natural disasters, which are really in so many cases human-caused disasters. The flooding in the Missouri River, 4 times the runoff in that basin leading into the Missouri River that you'd have in an average year. The greatest runoff that we've seen for as long as we've been keeping records on the Missouri River in this country. It's like Houston, Texas, in my home state. 58 inches fell from the sky on that community in just one storm, Hurricane Harvey. That is the landfall record for as long as we've been keeping them in North America. Flooding people out of their homes for the 3rd time in just 5 years. Each one of those storms, a 500-year flood. We should be good for the next 1,500 years. But those scientists say that due to our own inaction, those storms, those floods, those fires, those droughts, which undermine not only our ability to grow our own food, but to live where we call home today, will only become more profound, more devastating, and more destructive. They also tell us there are a little more than 10 years left to us within which to act. And we absolutely have to harness the political will of hundreds of millions of our fellow Americans, of a far more conscientious capitalism, the ingenuity, the innovation, the creativity that comes with that, and then once again, take our rightful role on the world stage as the indispensable nation to convene the other powers of the planet around an otherwise intractable problem in order to get it done. But the challenge right now in order to do that could not be greater. You have a president who, instead of believing the scientists, says that wind turbines cause cancer. Instead of joining or leading the rest of the world, has made the United States the one country out of 194 on the planet to withdraw from the Paris climate agreements. Our kids, our grandkids, the people of the future are going to look back on us, the people of 2019 and 2020, and they're going to want to know how we did. They will judge us for our action or our inaction, and we cannot be found wanting. This is our test, and this is our moment. And it cannot happen by half measure, and it cannot happen with half the country. It cannot be Democrats alone, those from big cities, those in only some parts of the country. It's going to take everything from all of us. And so, much in the same way that I have served in that manner, I am campaigning today for everyone in the United States. We will go everywhere, listen to everyone. Yes, with the courage of our convictions. I'll tell you what I believe, but I'll also listen to and learn from you, so I can reflect what is most urgent in your lives, the wisdom from your experiences, and bring that to bear on the campaign trail and in our public service. Come summer 2020, it is my hope, I'm going to do everything within my power to bring this to pass, that we will all be on the same team. Not only to defeat President Trump in November of 2020, but come January of 2021 to hit the ground running on this country's priorities, coming together unlike any other time in our history, because history calls us to do it now. Thank you for being here today. Thank you for welcoming me. Looking forward to answering your questions. Thank you all very much. Cynthia's got a microphone. I'm going to jump off the stump so I can see you eye to eye.
Is this hot?
It's hot.
Well, I'm going to bring up a subject that nobody talks about, and that is the leading cause of climate change is air travel. And there is no investment in our rail service. Now I'm looking forward to going to El Paso in another week or two. I'd like to get down there. I think it's a great city. I've been through there a number of times, but I've never stopped over. You know what the train service to El Paso is? Do you know what it's like? It's 3 days a week. It's called the Sunset Limited, and you've never seen the sunset on anything more limited. It's a small train, and yes, it loses money. How could you have a business where there's 7 days of demand, 7 days of expenses, and only 3 days of income? We need some kind of investment. Up until Trump, the national rail system was breaking records of what little service we have. By the way, the closest train station is down here, not in Des Moines. They're in Osceola. There's never been any investment in rail in many of these states, including Iowa. And I'd like to see also the Rail Runner, which you might have heard of, comes out of, that's unfinished.
Yeah.
That comes out of Albuquerque. It's unfinished from Santa Fe, and bring that right down to El Paso. And you've done a great job on El Paso Union Station with bus money, the bus station. But, you need a daily Sunset Limited or even another train. You need some kind of investment. And forget high-speed rail. Any speed will do.
Right.
Most of our tracks down here are from the 1850s with dangerous level crossings. And part of the expense of high-speed rail is getting rid of those crossings. And there's a lot of dangerous cargo. The main line to California is right down this hill. There's 100 trains a day to California. They're not passenger. So anyway, that's what I feel. What do you feel about that? Or do you agree with me on that? Or short distance air travel can be replaced with rail.
Yeah.
Long distance is something else.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. And the answer is yes, I do agree with you. I was recounting a little bit of the story of my father's side of the family, the O'Rourke's. James Francis O'Rourke, Pat Francis O'Rourke, Robert Francis O'Rourke, Ulysses Francis O'Rourke, my son. He's UFO, but we had to keep that Francis in the line. And for some reason, all of the O'Rourke men unfortunately pass away before they're the age of 60. My dad, no exception, and so I never had a chance to meet my grandfather or great-grandfather. Didn't really get the best stories out of my dad. So I turned to one of these genealogy and services, Ancestry.com. And through the war service records and the census records, I was able to trace the O'Rourkes, who all worked on the railroad. And I saw, one of the first patriarchs in the family. He's in Oto, Nebraska. Then he's in Buckland, Kansas. Then he's in Tucumcari, New Mexico. And then he comes to a rail hub, El Paso, Texas, Union Station. I think created or designed by the great Chicago architect who did a lot of these Union stations around the country. Absolutely, we've got to make an investment in rail. And yes, that should be a viable alternative to air travel, to car travel,
Short distance
to
air.
truck travel. Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned the Rail Runner in New Mexico, a line that runs from Santa Fe, I think, to Belen,
to
to
Belen, that's right.
Socorro, maybe. It should go all the way down to El Paso, then it should extend to Chihuahua, Mexico. To the great benefit of everyone along that line. That means jobs for those who will lay those tracks, who will run those trains. It means an environmental alternative to single occupancy vehicles and some of the truck traffic there and to airplanes. Yeah, here.
Do you know where they built Rail Runner? It goes down the middle of Interstate 25. And passenger trains can take hills you wouldn't believe. That follows that highway just like this. They built it down the middle of Interstate 25. And that's where you should put the tracks, by the way. Anyway, I just had to add that.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah, Cynthia's got it.
Hi, my name is Deirdre Taylor, and I have two questions. The first one is, I'm a U.S. Marine. I want to know, we have 40,000 homeless veterans in this country. I'm sick and tired of hearing this administration and others saying they're helping veterans because I'm going to call bull. I have a daughter that lives in Seattle. I walk down the Riverway and see many of my brothers and sisters homeless, begging for money. They're not being helped. What would you do if you were president to help those individuals? And what is your take on giving every veteran who has served full medical care for the rest of their life?
Thank you, Deirdre. Thank you both for serving and continue to serve by advocating for those who have also served. We're very quick. We're very quick in this country, to thank veterans, to tip our hat, to pat the back We're very slow to provide the resources necessary to follow through on our commitments and our obligations. As I mentioned in El Paso, when I was sworn in, longest wait times for a mental health care provider in the country. Fully 1/3 of veterans in El Paso could get no mental health care at all. By focusing on it, we went from 68 full-time mental health care providers and staff to I think close to 120 right now, but there's still more for us to do. We're no longer dead last in the country. Some days we outperform the national average. We will not be satisfied until we're number one in the country. A lot of cities have been working on veterans homelessness and have claimed functional zero, which means that you may still have some homeless veterans, but they have chosen not to accept housing, use these HUD-VASH vouchers that make housing more affordable for veterans. You have other cities that are coming nowhere close to functional zero. I see all these things being related. If you're one of those veterans who's waiting not weeks, not months, but years to get mental health care help, you came back with PTSD, traumatic brain injury, you may not be able to provide for yourself anymore. If you're one of those veterans who before President Trump signed that law that allows for other than honorable discharge veterans to get help, you may not have been able to help yourself. You may be out on the streets. Until we change the post 9/11 earned GI Bill benefit to make that a lifetime benefit so that you could use it whenever you needed to and ensure there was some accountability for those who were providing fraudulent educations to veterans, you may have been defrauded out of that earned benefit to improve yourself. So accountability in the round, especially for the VA and the extraordinary employees who work there to make sure that they're delivering care and service to those veterans. Accountability for those in positions of public trust and power, members of Congress, such as I was, or the President of the United States, when we have 45,000 funded, authorized, but unfilled positions at the VA that help to account for some of this crisis. You can connect it to another challenge. We have $1.5 trillion in outstanding student loan debt, and every graduating senior adds on average $40,000 to that. What if, instead of what the president proposes now, which is zeroing out the public service loan forgiveness program, if you're willing to come back home and work at that VA as a social worker, as a therapist, as a psychiatrist, any meaningful role that serves those who serve this country, what if we wipe clean your debt for the public service that you're going to provide? There's a way to meet these challenges, and I know that we're up to it. And absolutely, every returning veteran should be able to get the care that they need. I cannot tell you how many times we had to intercede on behalf of a veteran who went to the VA, got stuck in the bureaucracy and the red tape. And again, no judgment on those local VA providers. Very often these were orders coming down from Washington, D.C., who finally just said, try not to use a four-letter word, they finally just said, you know what, I'm not going to do it. I'm no longer going to wait in that line. I'm no longer going to try. I give up and aren't getting the help that they need. Maybe last thing connected to this, I didn't serve. Had a chance to serve those who did in the Congress, in the House Veterans Affairs Committee for 6 years. So many returning veterans explained this dynamic to me. They had just come back from deployment, from war, from combat, as essential as you can be as a human being. A member of a unit, and whatever they did or failed to do, would determine the fate not just for themselves, but the other men and women in that unit. You cannot become more essential than that as a human, I'm told by those who serve. And you come back to a country sometimes where we basically ask you to check a box in transition back to civilian life. And here you are, perhaps without a job, without a connection to a meaningful education, without access to the health care that you need to get back on your feet, without a roof over your head. And what should we expect from you? And so I think being conscious of that before transition. I authored a bill in the House of Representatives. I was also on the Armed Services Committee with Republican colleagues that requires a full mental health care screening for every separating service member, the same way we do a primary health care screening. So we catch some of these issues before they transition out of service. As you probably know, the military medical centers are better staffed, better resourced than their counterparts in the VA. While you're still in service, let's get you connected to that care right away. And we're also rewriting the Transition Assistance Program, or TAP, to make sure that we're not just checking boxes, that we have lengthy interviews and classes, connect you with the career or the education. I mentioned unions earlier. There's a wonderful program called Helmets to Hard Hats that gets you on track with an apprenticeship where you may then become a journeyman. You may then be able to have that purpose and function again in civilian life that you had in military life. So yes, there's a lot for us to do. There are a lot of great people to do it for. Thank you. Thanks for your service and thanks for asking.
Okay. I'm a hunter. Been hunting all my life. I love guns. But there's a limit. You don't need an AR. I realize that the Republican Party of Donald Trump are bought and paid for by the NRA and the gun manufacturers.
Yep.
Nobody outside the military needs to own a gun like that. When's it gonna stop? I mean, how many children, each time our kids get killed in schools, and it's usually with a gun like that, it's getting pushed to the back burner. Now Donald Trump said, well, when he started to have that meeting with all the teachers or with governors or whatever, well, who was in his office the next day? The NRA.
Yeah.
They've got a direct line to him and others in our government. Millions of dollars they spend on lobbies. When's it gonna stop?
Yeah.
Thank you for asking the question and for the way in which you asked the question. It reminds me of a town hall that we held in Wichita Falls, Texas, and a Vietnam era veteran comes up to me and he said, you know, that shooter, this was not too long after the shooting in Parkland, that shooter at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School was using a variant of the same weapon that I used in Vietnam, only he was able to fire more rounds than I was. In other words, he was better armed than I was at war in the jungles of Vietnam, and he was in a high school against defenseless children. So weapons that were engineered, designed, and then sold to the United States military because they do a really good job of killing people effectively, efficiently, in as many numbers as possible, should stay on the battlefield. They have no place in our communities. But like you, I know so many proud, responsible gun owners in Texas who use those firearms to hunt, for self-defense, for sport, for collection, whatever it is, as long as it's safe, as long as you're responsible, as long as you understand your accountability when you purchase that firearm, then we're okay. And we can share the knowledge and experience we have to make sure that we have sensible gun policy, like universal background checks, which have been shown to reduce violent gun deaths by 50% in those states that have adopted them. Let's adopt them everywhere for every single person in every single state. When Henry, our 8-year-old, came home from first grade last spring, said that he went through an active shooter drill where the teacher herded Henry and his classmates into a closet and they had to learn to resist the temptation to open the door when someone banged on it, impersonating a shooter. You know, my thought was, certainly for my son, what is he thinking? But that teacher who already sacrifices so much, and in Texas, odds are, is working a second job, is taking money out of her own pocket, not just for decorations and school supplies, but for a warm meal, for a kid who's on free and reduced breakfast and lunch and has no dinner to look forward to when she comes home. Now that teacher has to contemplate standing between an active shooter and those kids for whom she's already sacrificed so much. You're right, the political headwinds are against us on this. The NRA, the gun lobby, will spend any amount of money to purchase silence and complicity to prevent the Centers of Disease Control, get this, from even studying gun violence, lest we learn the real solution to the problem that produces more than 30,000 gun deaths in this country every year. No other country of our size or in the modern world even comes close. So you accept one of two conclusions. Either we are inherently evil or bad or violent, or this is a human cause problem and it has a human cause solution. Enter our democracy. We all got to stand up. That's why we don't take PACs from the NRA or anybody else. All people, all the time. When we do that, and when you stand up at meetings like these, your representatives act. The United States House of Representatives within the last 5 weeks just passed universal background checks. And as good as those women and men are, I guarantee you they did it out of that healthy fear that I talked about of you and the consequences of their failure to act. So we just need to keep that pressure up. We just need to make sure that we focus on people, not PACs, people, not corporations, people all the time. Thank you. Thanks for the question.
have time for 2 more questions. The reason you're standing by that stump is that we had a tornado last July 19th. I work for local government, and I've seen dealing with FEMA, and we've had some good people here, but I've seen what's happened in Puerto Rico. I grew up in Houston and in Sharpstown, so I know what's going on there, and there just has to be a better system to help people now with the flooding. FEMA it's just a broken system, and it has to be repaired to help people. We have good people here, but we are struggling, and a lot of people don't realize what all the things that we need.
Thank you for raising that. And first of all, we could not help but notice as we drove into the town, the destruction that's still evident from last July. Lots of stumps like this one, some trees that are still in pieces, kind of barely connected. Homes where many of the shingles or whole parts of the roof are still missing so many months after that disaster. If there's anything more that we can do, that I can be a part of at the federal level, believe me, I want to do it, and I will take your guidance to ensure that we do. But as we were reading the paper today about one community after another here in Iowa, helping others who've just been affected by the Missouri River, breaking its banks, flooding those homes, those communities, those farms, the grain, the soybeans kept in storage, they cannot find a market in the midst of this trade war and these tariffs imposed by this president. Grain and soybeans that are not insured, that will not be covered by the president's emergency declaration. Our Congress has yet failed to act on this, unless they did while I was on the stump, which is possible. We need to make sure that the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Secretary Perdue, while he still can, and I believe that he has the power, gets that aid to everyone who needs it immediately now. We'll ask for forgiveness later. We don't need permission. We need to get help to those who are suffering at this very moment. But then, we need to make some really big investments, because the scientists are very clear on this. These storms, these floods, they're only going to become more frequent, more devastating, more destructive. So where we can mitigate that, an investment in Army Corps of Engineers, protection and infrastructure along the Missouri River, surge control in Houston and some of our coastal communities, and then an acknowledgement that we've got to do everything we can to keep this planet from warming, because these disasters will only become more frequent. All of that needs to happen, but I would begin with immediate disaster relief, move on to infrastructure, and then this longer-term challenge of climate change. And then on the red tape of FEMA, let's get the aid directly to people, and we'll work on the paperwork afterwards. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Hi, my name is Kim Smith. I'm a retired child care provider. I did in-home child care, which I'm a big proponent of. I had families from the time the children were 6 weeks till the time they were in grade school, after school care. I see that as a vital part of taking care of our children. It doesn't start at 4, pre-K. There is a whole bunch of stuff that happens in the first 3 years of life. Right. And that is being left off the table, in my opinion, for discussion. And how can we support those people who are willing to build those relationships with families, see those kids, provide loving, quality care without becoming institutionalized care, where children are shipped off to daycare centers where, okay, this is my bias coming out.
Yeah, that's okay.
It's coming out. Where staff turns over, they do not have that continuity of care, they do not have the loving support that they need. So, just want to throw that out, that you should be thinking about those things.
So here, Cynthia, if you'll help me, I want to make sure that I get your number if you're willing.
Sure.
Would love to follow up with you. I'm going to make the rare admission for a politician that I don't have a good answer to your question. I've been really thinking about pre-K. I've been thinking about paid family leave. I've even been thinking about assistance with child care. But you just mentioned specifically non-institutional child care.
Which I think is the best for every kid in this country.
For kids. So let me learn from you and not try to pretend that I have the answer. Okay. I think I understand the need, but help me to get to that solution.
Absolutely.
And I'd be willing to work with you. So we're going to get your name and phone number right now so we can follow up with you directly. Thank you. Does that allow us a bonus round of one more question? Because I didn't have the answer to that one. It was short.
Yeah, what can you say to that?
Yeah. Anyone have a question? There we go.
Thank you. I'm Sue Cahill. I'm a public school teacher. I appreciate that you talked about education from the preschool all the way through college and career readiness. I have to admit, this morning I helped my son, who is a recent college graduate, go and refinance $125,000 worth of student loans as he starts his first job.
Wow.
But my question is, in our public school system, I am a proponent that we have what it takes to serve kids. We also have choices that are outside of that as a parent, I have a choice to do. I'm very concerned with our current Department of Education, with issues such as providing vouchers to non-public schools, or realigning how we fund Special Olympics, how we take care of our kids from birth all the way through college and beyond, college and career readiness. So I want to know what your thoughts are on providing for that, for making our public schools the best they can, and every dollar we give away in a voucher is making our public schools less.
Great, thank you, and thanks for your commitment to public service. So, our three kids, Ulysses, Molly, and Henry, all go into the same world-class public schools I was lucky enough to go to in El Paso. Mesita Elementary, and Ulysses is now at Wiggs Middle School. And in my parents' generation, were you to speak Spanish in the halls of Mesita, you would be disciplined if you kept it up, suspended, if you persisted, expelled. In my generation, there was a Spanish class. It was 45 minutes a day, 5 days a week. In my kids' generation, they're learning math in Spanish today. Monday, they'll learn math in English. They're calculating, they're thinking, they're reading, they're writing, they're listening, they're learning. They're existing in both languages, in both worlds, in the largest binational community in the Western Hemisphere, making the most of who we are, where we are. And that innovation came from public school educators. Wasn't dreamed up in the private market. It wasn't sent down from Washington, D.C. It was our local community making the most of who we are. So to me, that is testament to the power of those public schools and public school educators that you just talked about. And there's also something that brings us together on the threat that we face, whether from Betsy DeVos or this administration or others. And I saw that loud and clear in a very conservative, very Republican community, listening to a very Republican school teacher, public school teacher. She told me, if we allowed Betsy DeVos to take her public tax dollars out of her classroom, away from the kids that she is teaching, she said, Beto, I will hunt you down. I will find you, and I will hold you accountable for that. So here we are, Democrat and a Republican. I come from a bigger city. She comes from a smaller town. We have common cause on this issue. But if I had not shown up to listen to her, she may not know that we're on the same team when it comes to public education. This is an extraordinary investment that produces an exceptional return. We want kids who become adults, who are educated, make informed choices, can earn more over the course of their life and do more for their communities, their families, and for their country. I didn't know this until someone shared this with me recently. One of the responses to the last concentration of wealth and power and privilege in the Gilded Age of more than 100 years ago that provoked some of the progressive leadership that you saw from Teddy Roosevelt and others was universal high school education. That was not a thing that you could take for granted in every part of the United States. An exceptional investment, but it provided the education necessary to prepare the workforce that would build the greatest economy the world had ever seen. It would be ready to take on Nazi Germany come 1941 and would make the world safe for democracy. I chalk a lot of that up to an investment in education. I want to make that same investment both for those at the public school level and then for your son and others who are pursuing higher education, to relieve them of some of that debt, at a minimum to refinance it as you just did, wipe it clean for public service. But going forward, let's make sure that we don't accumulate it in the same rate to the same degree so that we can spare them that crushing load that they're carrying right now. Thank you for the question. Thank you all, Marshalltown, for having us out. Very, very grateful. Really appreciate it. Michelle, thank you for hosting. Appreciate it.